Hello and welcome to another edition of the Dan Assor Show, sponsored by TF Connect. Today, I welcome back a good friend of the show, Doug Emslie. Doug is the CEO of Tarsus Group, and Tarsus Group are a Dan Assor Show patron. So good afternoon, Doug.
Hi, Dan. How are you? It's nice to be back.
Yes, I'm getting used to that background, actually, because every time I've interviewed you, well, most times, unless you've been at a show, you're in that room. So I recognise that blind, actually, sort of to your left or right.
This is where my wife imprisons me when I'm at home.
Well, you can see where I've been imprisoned. I couldn't be bothered to put the green screen up, so I just thought, just let people see it's authentic, isn't it? So, Doug, we're going to talk about the Dubai Airshow, which has just taken place, a couple of weeks ago now. We're now 24th of November for those that are listening. So, and obviously it was 5 days, 14th to the 18th, at the DWC Airshow site. Yeah. Before we get into the detail, for those that aren't sort of aware of the detail of the aviation industry, as I understand it, I guess like the trade show and exhibition and events world, the aviation industry was clearly hit very hard from the pandemic because international travel in most countries pretty much stopped. Can you tell us a bit about that and what the shape of the recovery has been like for the industry?
I mean, the industry has been massively impacted. And I mean, it's only fairly recently are we seeing sort of major movements coming back for the UK and Europe going to the US. That was only the 8th of November. So that's, very, very recent. And for Dubai, which is obviously very relevant to the subject today, the two biggest routes for Dubai are the UK and India. And both of those routes only opened up about 6 weeks ago. So again, that's fairly new. But to put it into context, what's happened to the industry, I think it's really interesting just to look at the stats for Dubai. So Dubai is the busiest international airport in the world. Pre-pandemic, it was doing 90 million passengers a year.
Wow.
Last year, it did 10 million.
Right.
And it was still the busiest international airport in the world.
Do you know how that compares to, say, Heathrow, just out of interest?
So Heathrow would be about 70 million sort of passengers.
Sure.
And what's happening now as borders are reopening is a sort of massive increase on a monthly basis. So in the last 4 weeks, Dubai's traffic has doubled through the airport. Wow. And they're now running at about 56% of where they were pre-pandemic. So it's coming back, and it's coming back quickly.
Sure.
And obviously they'll see a big increase as we get into the Christmas period with a lot of people traveling. So it is coming back. It's obviously complicated for people traveling and going to different places, as we were just discussing about doing sort of, COVID tests and doing the paperwork, and it's different by location. So it is a major sort of administrative exercise if you want to go anywhere now. But that's, I think, the life in which, we're going to have to accept that we're going to live with.
Sure. And obviously the aviation industry, subject to fluctuations of price of oil as well. So they have to hedge against the prices there. So I guess, that they have to take that into account as well. And in terms of, so there's, as I understand it, there's, I guess, two parts of the aviation industry. You've got commercial. So, you and I going off on a holiday somewhere, and obviously business. So freight and cargo. Was the impact different? So, and the recovery, the shape of that, has that been different or pretty similar?
Yeah, I mean, it has been different. I mean, on the commercial side, it's, as I've just outlined, obviously heavily impacted. On the business side, it's had a booming period where a lot of people have been traveling privately, where they need to go anywhere if they've got money. So that industry's done really well. And then on cargo, I mean, there's been a number of forces there in that a lot of cargo goes at the bottom of the commercial passenger airliners, and obviously they haven't been flying, therefore there hasn't been the same amount of cargo. So what you've seen is people consolidating cargo and actually hiring planes just to actually move cargo. And the other factor is that with all the issues happening, particularly in China, with cargo going by ship and everything being delayed and all the supply chain issues we've heard about, obviously people are looking to, if they can, to ship it any which way. Costs have gone up dramatically, but air freight has gone up 40% in the last month. So there's been a massive increase in cargo.
Yeah.
Just really reflecting those industry challenges.
Sure. So moving on to thank you for that. Moving on to the show itself. I've had a look at a few videos, and there were sort of flashbacks and throwbacks to when it first started. Can you tell us about the show, sort of the history of it, and sort of how Tarsus came to help run it?
Yeah, I mean the show had its first beginnings as Arab Air, would you believe, in 1986.
Right.
And then became the Dubai Air Show in 1989. Obviously very, very small, and it was part of the Dubai vision to build out a major presence within the aerospace and aviation industries. And we got involved in 2007. So this was my 7th Dubai Air Show. And we bought the organizing company, which was called F&E, which actually was based in the UK. So it was UK based, but actually the shows were all in Dubai. And we've gone on, and the show has grown really as a result of the growth of the industry in the Middle East, and that's really reflective within the major carriers. So you've seen the growth of Emirates, of Etihad, of Qatar. So that they've been the big drivers in the region, and that's been one of the reasons why the Dubai Air Show has continued to grow and grow strongly.
Sure. And when you took the decision to acquire it, what's part of the decision making? Is it because you look at the market like aviation and you sort of look at trends? How do you, just for educational purposes, how do you make a decision of what industry to go into?
Well, we were looking at the trends of basically passengers and cargo, and we could see a massive transition in the sector. You go back 20, 30 years ago, 70% of traffic, whether it was passengers or cargo, was effectively US, UK, Europe. And over that 20-year period, that balance has now shifted, that you don't need to fly to the UK or Europe to go to the Middle East or to go to Asia. You can actually fly direct. So we were seeing and continue to see a massive shift in terms of basically where that traffic is going, and the growth is really coming out of the Middle East and Asia. So we could see an asset that was going to grow because of that dynamic, but we could also see the investment that was going in terms of the major carriers like Emirates.
Sure. And as I understand it, the show is every other year, is that right?
Every 2 years, yeah.
Yeah. And what's the reason for that, rather than doing it annually?
Yeah, well, the rhythm of the air shows, there are really 4 major air shows in the world, and 2 happen 1 year and 2 in the other. So in the odd years, it's Dubai and Paris, and in the even years, it's Farnborough and Singapore.
Okay,
so that is the rhythm of the shows, and the shows are doing different things. And they've got the different strengths. And Dubai is very much a buying show. It's where actually contracts get consummated.
Right. And so talking about the type of people that attend the event or the show, just bring that to life. So both in terms of maybe the suppliers, exhibitors, and obviously the delegates or the buyers.
Yeah, so what you've got is a combination of, on the buyer side, you have all the commercial airlines there. They're looking to source new planes, place orders. You've got private jet companies. You have got leasing companies who are again looking to source. And then also we've got a military component as well. So we have about 300 delegations coming from various countries, where we would have ministers, chiefs of staff, who are having sort of meetings and looking at, again, buying military-based equipment. So you have a sort of a total sort of combination. And the big change that's happened over the last 10 years and is continuing is the building out of the local supply chain. Right. So no longer will companies be able to sort of supply from Europe or from America. It's being done and has to be done sort of locally. So the majority of new companies or new exhibitors at the show actually were local companies that didn't exist 2 years ago.
Right. Because I was going to ask you, in terms of the differences with the audience, both in terms of numbers and type. So you've seen a shift since previous. Can you bring that to life in terms of maybe some numbers? And
so I mean, we in terms of exhibitors, we have just under 1,300 exhibitors, of which approximately 300 were new exhibitors this year. So a lot of new exhibitors. That there was obviously some exhibitors, international exhibitors, who couldn't come. Sure. But that being said, we had 21 new exhibitors from different countries, but 148 countries in total represented at the show. So quite diverse. And in terms of the makeup of the show, about sort of 60% of that is commercial, about 40% of it is military. And in terms of the big countries, from a visitor perspective, obviously the UAE and Saudi Arabia, then the US third. In terms of exhibitors, obviously a lot of the local companies. And then you have big presences from the US, from Germany, from the UK, France, Russia. Yeah. And for the first time, as a result of the accord that was signed in November last year, Israel. And Israel is a very, very big presence within the sector, which, because of the politics in the region, haven't been able to participate, but now are.
Yes, because there was that watershed agreement, I think, a couple of years ago, wasn't there, between the two countries? I thought when I watched a few videos, I recognised some Israeli accents. Yeah. And you mentioned before that it's a buyer's show, so that's where contracts are actually struck. How do you go about facilitating that? Because there's lots of chatter that I listen to, various groups and on social media, and people have conversations with about, the people that we now get to the show. We have to try and get them to do more business, right? So we invite people to hosted buyers and one-to-one meetings. How do you go about sort of facilitating that at this show?
Well, it really comes, I would say, in three components. Firstly, on the major civil side and military side, we have delegations that are organized, meetings are scheduled. We have people who are dedicated to doing nothing other than looking after those key buyers for the 5 days that they're in Dubai.
Right. It's like a concierge type of service.
Concierge service. a large number of those are actually hosted by the government themselves. The government or the government bodies will be heavily involved in that whole program. So we work with them, making sure the right people are there. Then we have a meeting one-to-one opportunity that we have as an app, and we use Grip to do that for this show.
Yeah.
So basically a whole matching program. And then the third component, which was new to the show this year, is that we had 80 new startup companies.
Okay.
And these were all sort of technology companies or putting in new technologies for the industry. And we had a whole lot of content, including meetings, primarily with investors in the sector or companies in the sector who were looking to do deals with new technology companies. So basically facilitated that whole process. And it was probably one of the features of this year's Airshow is we've invested heavily in the content.
Yeah.
And that was one of the major components in getting everyone together and in organizing meetings around with those key people.
Sure.
So more meetings than ever, more heavily procured than ever.
So do you have key themes around each show every other year? Is there a central theme or...
Yeah, it varies, but I mean the themes coming out of this show were firstly and very strongly sustainability. I mean, obviously we've just had COP26. The aviation industry is a very visible part of that, and obviously very much spoken about. And what I can say is the industry is taking it incredibly seriously. They are doing things. And it was one of the major reasons that we saw buying ahead of our expectations, because the major airlines are investing in new fleets that are more efficient, that are using less fuel, and also into a lot of green fuel products as well. Yeah. So that is a big trend that is coming. So sustainability is real, and the industry is doing a lot about it.
Sure.
Secondly, technology. The industry is incredibly inefficient. If you think about your whole experience of going into an airport, dropping off your luggage, getting your ticket, getting through immigration. It's getting worse now with all the different forms to get into different countries around COVID. So there's a huge process in terms of actually making that a lot more efficient and the use of technology. Then the other themes, cargo, as we've talked about, is a major issue, massively expanding. So that was a big content component. And then the final one, and we signed on site a major agreement with the UAE Space Agency, is Space. So Space has been in the show for the last 2 editions. But will become a major component of the 23 show. The UAE is investing heavily into space. They've got their program to go to Mars, and they are getting together with other space agencies and cooperations. But what they want to do is build out that whole ecostructure with all the supply chain that goes into space.
Sure. Doug Emslie on Mars. Fancy going to Mars?
Well, space is the final frontier.
It is. Okay, thank you for that. In April, Tarsus announced a partnership with an aviation blogger, the leading one in the sector, Sam Chu, or Chewy. Sam Chu, sorry. Can you sort of bring that partnership to life, and then how that came to fruition at the show itself? How that works, please.
Well, we were wanting to do something new and innovative in terms of how we promoted what we were doing with the Airshow. The Airshow, as we've just discussed, is every 2 years. It's quite a long time. So we wanted to do something different in terms of content, getting interactions. So we did a partnership with Sam, which was all about doing a series of videos pre-show, at the show, behind the scenes access, and then some post-show to give people a better flavor of the whole experience.
Sure.
And that has been very successful in terms of people getting a flavor of what is going on. It's bringing in a new audience of enthusiasts. But it's also a piece of a broader strategy, because we've about a month ago created a partnership with Times Aerospace, which is a media company that's in the Middle East, which was predominantly magazine based, but we've taken that format into the web, into video, and it's mainly focused around news and more technical for the industry. So our idea was to offer more new content, more interesting content, and just keep the audience engaged. And the industry is looking for new ways of engaging.
Sure.
So I think it's a very important component, but the very strong message coming back from our customers is that they were very, very happy to meet face to face. They were ecstatic that they didn't have to do it over Zoom. And it, to me, just showed the power of face to face. And just to put that into numbers, if we look at the industry coming back generally, shows are coming back, a good show coming back sort of 80-85%, you would be very happy with. But what we saw was a Dubai Airshow that was up in terms of its revenue and exhibitor numbers on 19. But more importantly, the attendance for the first time went through 100,000 trade buyers. So it was up 24%.
Amazing.
Which just showed that people were really desperate to get back to face and do business.
Was there any virtual element at all? So could people consume any of the content either during or afterwards?
So there was none at the show, and that was deliberate. The industry was very clear that they wanted it face to face. There was a lot, that we did pre-show in terms of educational components, and that will continue as part of our strategy in the 2-year cycle, but not at the live event. The live event was about the live event.
Sure. Talking about influencers, and obviously we just spoke, and it's only 3 days since Sam posted his video, and it's got almost 500,000 views. Do you see influencers forming a greater part of the marketing mix for B2B show organizers going forward?
I do. I think that in certain industries that they're going to be a critical component, where there are enthusiast groups. The brands are spending more and more into the direct-to-consumer channel and want to create those relationships, and influencers are a core part of that. So I definitely see this as a continuing trend. It's something that we are continuing to experiment with and seeing if we come up with solutions. And I think what is interesting is that we deliver something very valuable to the influencer, which is the audience, but also the influencer delivers to us a new audience. And what's quite interesting coming through is we're seeing generally in the industry some very interesting statistics. One is that roughly about 50% of new people that engaged with our industry for the first time virtually in the last 18 months, 50% of those are now going to the live event. And that is resulting in the demographic of participation coming down. So younger people are coming into our industry or to come to our shows. And I think that is a really important trend that we've got to continue to focus on, and influencers are a key part.
Yeah, absolutely, because I guess they become the buyers of tomorrow. So they might be enthusiasts today, but they become the buyers of tomorrow. So I think you need the combined audience. Okay, thank you very much for that, Doug. Just want to move on just briefly to some other areas. So we sit here now, end of November, almost at the end of the year. Looking back over 2021, how pleased are you of how it's turned out for Tarsus, I guess, to start off with?
I mean, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I think when we started off at the beginning of January, we anticipated and certainly were budgeting for it to be a very sort of bouncy restart.
Sure.
And that's definitely been the case. I think it's bluntly been more bouncy than we thought. We've seen a situation where the US resumed in June, which we thought it would. But then obviously with the Delta variant, it got quite tricky in August and September, but obviously doing better now. China, which had been going really well, in August we've started to see sort of lockdowns, and
Sure.
that continues. So that's been more of a surprise than we anticipated. But if I look overall, you know, we're probably back at about 70%, and the area that's definitely been the slowest for us has been Southeast Asia, and we're just beginning to see some shows resume, but for us it's probably not going to be into probably the middle of next year before we'll see a proper resumption. So that's been a little bit slower than we thought.
Sure. But overall, if you sat there in January knowing what you do today, you would have taken that as a win.
Yeah, I think I do take it as a win, and I think the key thing is, you know, it's impossible to budget in these times because there's just so many variables. But the most important thing is actually getting back and getting running, and for the teams to actually be back running shows has been hugely important. And for our industries, where we've seen shows run, we've seen huge enthusiasm. And as a result, we've seen good rebookings into 22. So that's what gives me encouragement, is that actually we're back, we're running, and actually it's going to be, you know, 22, maybe 23 before we get really back. But actually, it's really encouraging where we are running shows. They're going well, and the buyers are coming and want them.
Sure. And rolling forward 12 months, if we're having this conversation, if you allow me again in 12 months' time, what would success look like over the next 12 months?
I think success would be we've continued to build back. I think that the industry will come back at different speeds and different locations. I mean, I think the US by this time next year will be fully back. Obviously, as we sit here today, Europe's looking a bit difficult with some more restrictions. But I think, you know, again, in a year's time, Europe will be a lot better. I think the positive thing is that Asia will be back, and definitely it will come back quicker than people think, because what has really pleased me is the strength of the demand for buyers for face-to-face. So we are allowed to run, and shows do run, we'll see a strong bounce back.
Sure. And in terms of the broader exhibition industry, if you've got your crystal ball out, how do you think? I know obviously there's going to be sort of regional variances, but what do you think generally the future holds for next year for the industry?
I think we'll see more of the same. I mean, we've done 4 acquisitions this year, and hopefully we'll do another 2 before the end of this year. Okay. And you know, we've got confidence in the market, and we'll continue to invest, and I think other people will as well.
Yeah.
I think the positive things is that people believe in our industry and are continuing to invest in it. And the biggest challenges I think we're going to have is around talent. And I know obviously that's something very close to your heart, but I think on talent, that's probably our biggest challenge in the industry in a funny way.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, doing some work with Trevor at TF Connect, and you know, there's two parts of it. There's retention of existing staff, and there's acquisition of new talent. How have you found that in Tarsus, and what sort of strategies are you employing, both to retain and attract?
Well, we've done a lot of work in retaining people, communicating with people. You know, they want to remain in the industry, and I think that is key. I think the challenges are coming mainly around sales and marketing.
Sure.
In that, especially in marketing, those skills are highly valuable. There's lots of other industries that are trying to steal those people. And for our industry, the skill sets are changing. You know, we're doing more digital. We need people who really understand that channel, both from a sales and marketing perspective. And that means we're going to have to bring in new people.
Sure.
And they're more difficult to get. They're probably more expensive. So I think that's going to be a growing trend, that actually how we think about our businesses are going to be different in terms of skills, but also in terms of the cost. I mean, the cost is going up.
Yeah.
And we can't ignore that.
Yeah, and I think there definitely needs to be more benchmarking, right, from of other industries. You know, if we're going to be speaking to these people, trying to attract them in. And finally, obviously, this year was a busy one for you personally in terms of your challenges, your athleticism. You did the Backyard Ultra, did the Boston Marathon. You told me you did the New York Marathon. What's in store for Doug in 22 in that area?
Well,
Everest.
My challenges really reflect the industry challenges, in that I've got a lot of events that I entered that didn't happen, and they're rolling over into 22.
Yeah.
But I set myself sort of 3 years ago 3 challenges which I still haven't completed yet, and I was hoping to get them all done in 20, then 21, and now I'm hoping, third time lucky, 22. Okay. But I want to do the 6 major marathons in the world, and I've only got one left, and that's Tokyo, which is in March. I wanted to do the largest and oldest ultra marathon in the world, which is Comrades in South Africa. Okay. So I've had a place for the last 2 years, and it's been cancelled. So I'm hopeful next year it'll actually run, and I'll run it. And then my final one, which is very close to my own heart, is I want to run the West Highland Way in Scotland, which is 96 miles.
Wow.
So I've managed to convince Mike Seaman to do that with me, and we'll get some other people, and Matt Coyne will come and maybe do a little bit of a film.
Yeah.
That's hopefully the crescendo. Maybe I'll retire if I get that done.
So again, hopefully this time next year, God willing, you would have completed those, and I'm sure one or two others along the way. Doug Emslie, CEO of Tarsus Group, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for joining the show.
Great, nice to speak, Dan.